Hello, welcome to today's upload. Today we're going to look at William Blake's poem London. We're going to do a detailed analysis and look through the structure and the language used from stanza to stanza. So before we start, let's think a little bit about William Blake. It's always interesting to know a little bit about the poets, what their thoughts were, the context, what was going on at the time that the poem was wrote, helps us develop our understanding. So William Blake, he lived in London. At the time there was the Industrial Revolution. He was opposed to the Industrial Revolution. He was also opposed to the church. He didn't like the fact, he didn't think the church were helping the people enough. He thought the Industrial Revolution was taking control of people and taking away. It was oppressing the people. In 1789 at this time as well, there had just been the French Revolution. Blake liked this. And he liked the fact that the power in France, the power was coming back to the people. The freedom of speech was being allowed. So when we look at London, London tells us everything that is wrong with London. He creates this dirty, dark, horrible place through lots of sensory language. He tells us about the sights and the sounds of London. So we hear the cry of every man. We hear the infant's cry and the youthful harlots cursing at night. It is structured in 4 stanzas of 4 quatrains. It has a rhyming pattern, A-B, has enjambment, and has iambic tetrameter, which is 4 pairs of syllables per line. So if we just slow down a little bit and go back over this and look at the poem. So there are 4 stanzas, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 lines in each stanza. 4 lines in a stanza is a quatrain. So there's 4 stanzas of 4 quatrains. We also see a rhyming pattern: street, meet, war, floor. So A, B, man, ban, fear, here. So man, fear, ban, here. A, B. So the rhyming pattern A, B throughout. So there is that rhyming pattern. There's enjambment. So here, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldiers sigh, runs in blood down palace walls. The lines flow onto the next line. So the structure, we have them 4 stanzas of 4 quatrains, the rhyming pattern, the enjambic, and the iambic. Now, usually when we talk about iambic, you probably are aware of iambic pentameter. When we think of the sonnets and we think of Romeo and Juliet, we think about Shakespeare writing these love stories and using this beautiful language of iambic pentameter. Iambic tetrameter is very similar. The only difference is pentameter has 5 pairs of syllables, tetrameter has 4. So de-dum, 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 de-dum. 4 pairs of syllables. So if we just look at that as an example, let's pick a line. In every cry. So in every cry of every man. There's 8 syllables, 4 sets of 2 in every line. So it's a very well organized poem. Now what does that tell us about London? Why is it so well organized? Well, the structure shows conformity. Remember, Blake, he's opposed to this conformity. He's opposed to doing what we are told to do and living under these rules. The poem follows all these rules. So London is a metaphor for what is going on. That everything is, we are told what to do. So people having to conform. It also links straight away. Now we're going to look at each stanza, but just before we do, in the very first 2 lines, the repetition of the word chartered and chartered. So chartered means the streets are under control, the Thames is under control. What does the word chartered mean? That it is structured, it is organised, it belongs. So man has taken control, and William Blake does not like this. So let's have a read through the poem and then let's analyse each stanza. If you want to fast forward this section, please feel free. You can go to any of the stanzas, and what we are doing is we'll highlight some of the techniques and just talk a little bit about each one. So, the poem, London by William Blake. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of war. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldiers sigh, runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlots curse, blast the newborn baby's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So straight on to stanza 1. Now one of the first things that I do when I look at poems is I look at the structure, just what it looks like on the paper. So here we see straight away that conformity, the 4 fours, 4 stanzas, 4 lines, the rhyming pattern. It's very, like we say, it's conformed. But I look for the I wonder, and then I hear. So the use of the personal pronoun I tells me the poem is presented, it is told through the first person narrative. It is a first person narrative. So London is presented in the first person narrator, and we know that from the use of the personal pronoun I. Again, we've got the repetition of charted, and the fact that charted, it's repeated, so Blake is emphasizing the control, that the streets now are controlled, the commercial control of the streets. And the river, the Thames. Now that's quite interesting, because a river, we usually think a river could be a metaphor for freedom. It's a symbol of kind of the nature, that the flow, freedom. However, if we say it's charted, charted means controlled. So even man is controlled, the charted streets, and nature is controlled, the charted Thames. So Blake is emphasising straight away through the repetition of charted that London is being controlled. And then we have repetition of mark. Mark every phase, marks of weakness, marks of war. The repetition of that marks mentioned 3 times, it creates a negative imagery. A mark on your face, a mark, something we see, a dirty mark. So repetition, it's shown that negative imagery. And then we have some alliteration. Weakness, war. Again, very emotive language. Marks of weakness, marks of war. So again, the alliteration. Remember, whenever we see repetition, and it happens twice in this one stanza, repetition is always used to emphasize. So it's a hint when analyzing and looking at a poem. If we say repetition, straight away we've got the start of a line. The writer uses repetition to emphasize, and then the problem is we have to work out what he's emphasizing, but we know it's there for a reason. So we have personal pronouns, repetition, negative imagery, emotive language, and alliteration. In the second stanza, we see some anaphorak. So if you remember what that is, it is when we start. It's a type of repetition, but it's usually at the start of a line. So in every. So that is there. Remember what we just said about repetition, to emphasize. So straight away, what is he emphasizing? He's emphasizing how it's affecting all. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every man. Look how many times every is used in this stanza. It's kind of, the stanza is almost just every. So the repetition of cry and the anaphorak, the repetition of every, it just emphasizes that everyone is suffering. And cry is a sound, so that century language of sound. And then it ends the stanza with a metaphor. The mind forged manacles I hear. So forged is something that's branded, something that's made. So this suffering has been made by man. And manacles are kind of the chains. So these forged, these man-made chains. It's the metaphor that everybody is imprisoned and is oppressed by the state. So repetition, anaphora, and metaphor in stanza 2. In stanza 3, how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. So he's telling us how the needy people are suffering. The chimney sweepers, children, that they are crying. The soldiers that have been to war, that are suffering, that might have lost limbs, they are sighing. So this stanza tells us all about how the needy people are suffering. Interestingly, he calls the church blackening church appalls. Now, he says that just in the line below chimney sweepers. We would expect the word blackening to be used with chimney sweepers, but he doesn't. He puts it in the line below with blackening church. That is used to emphasize how dirty and how black the church is. And that's a metaphor that the church is not helping, that it is letting the people become oppressed. We would expect the church to help. Blake thinks it's not. And then runs in blood down palace walls. So we have a metaphor at the end there. if we think that image of, well, strong imagery as well, runs in blood running down palaces' walls. But if we think of Macbeth, and we think of how Macbeth has blood on his hands, when he says, I have blood on my hands, Lady Macbeth takes it literally. That just go and wash your hands. And he says, that even Neptune's oceans. So again, this is very similar, that what William Blake is saying, the palace walls, the powers that be, they have blood on their hands. They are responsible for the people suffering. So we can blame Parliament, we can blame the palace. That is who is responsible for all this pain, the cries and the sighs. And then we come to the final stanza. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, the blights and plagues, the marriage hearse. So, but most through midnight streets. So, most importantly, the use of the word most, that the harlots, the prostitutes are cursing. So you can hear prostitutes swearing and cursing. And then the imagery of suffering of the newborn infant's tear. So London is being overtaken by the bad, by the prostitutes, by the dirt and the dark. And the marriage hearse. Marriage hearse. Marriage is an act of when two people tie their lives together. And a hearse is where is what we put dead bodies in. So a marriage and a hearse, the start of life together, marriage, the end of life, a hearse. It's an oxymoron. Two opposites next to each other. It's oxymoron. So we ends with that oxymoron, that image of what should be good is not good. So London is a metaphor for suffering and depression. Hopefully this video will have helped. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you have any videos that you would like to see uploaded or any poetry that you would like me to see me analyse, please leave comments in the notes below.